Okay, well, hello and welcome. This is the UCCS Undergraduate Policy Research Showcase. It's our favorite time of year. It's an opportunity to celebrate all of your achievements as students and also to thank our internship hosts for providing an experiential learning opportunity for each of you. So we're really grateful. We're also proud of you for what we understand is really hard work, balancing your practical work within your internship offices and also doing the academic work, which we hope that there's some synergies or connections. And if those aren't apparent now, maybe they'll be apparent later. There's sort of a theory behind the idea of having you do these projects. And, we've just been wowed by projects in the past that students have been able to accomplish. And I'm sure the same will be true this time. But the theory is that the best way to become an informed consumer of knowledge is to produce some knowledge yourself. And in the past, the knowledge that's been produced by students is focused on really important policy problems. I'm sure the same is true today, and we really look forward to hearing your presentations. So let's go for it.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Kravitz. So welcome everyone. So the format today will be that each student will present. After the student presents, we will take one question from their internship host site. We ask that the internship host site goes ahead and raises their hand, and I'll call on them and unmute them. If there isn't a question from the internship host site, then we'll turn that question over to the academic team. Same thing, you'll raise your hand, and then I'll go ahead and call on you to go ahead and ask your question. And we'll go kind of through that with each student. And at the end of all of our presentations, if there's time, then there will be an open Q&A portion where anyone in the audience and anyone on the academic team can ask any of our students questions about their research presentation today. All right, and with that, our first student is Fozia Farouk, and she interned with the Office of California State Governor Gavin Newsom.
Hello, my name is Fozia Farouk and I attend the University of California, Davis. Before the pandemic, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stated that housing is one of the most complicated policy issues that we face, period. This is very well said as it pertains to the national struggle that politicians face when deciding solutions for the housing crisis. In my research project, I will be investigating one of the housing affordability crises, which is what is the relationship of housing costs to the homeless population in California, New York, Texas, and Florida from 2014 to 2020. My hypothesis is that an increase in the cost of housing leads to an increase in the homeless population. I analyzed 4 states by using data for housing costs from Zillow and the US Census Bureau, and from the homeless population through a point-in-time count from the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness. After completing a correlation analysis, the findings show a weak relationship between median home values and homelessness, whereas median rent values and homelessness has a moderate relationship. However, this relationship varied between states. In New York and California, as median home and rent values increase, the homeless population also increases. In Texas, the cost of housing and homelessness does not have a relationship because they don't have very high housing costs and criminalize their homeless population by banning encampments. Finally, in Florida, housing cost does increase over the years, but the homeless population decreases because of their general focus on reducing homeless veterans off the streets. Therefore, my hypothesis was supported for 2 out of the 4 states discussed. Furthermore, I've included a map of metro regions focusing on clusters around Texas and California to demonstrate the rent-to-home ownership ratio as it differs across regions. My policy suggestions are to focus on homeless veterans, just as Florida has accomplished, to decrease their homeless population, by creating more affordable housing units and accessory home dwellings, but without a zoning system. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation.
Well, thank you so much, Fozia, for just a fantastic talk today. And so, and with that, is there a question from the governor's office? All right, Emily Patterson, I just unmuted on our end. If you can unmute yourself, perfect.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Great, Fozia, great presentation. Thank you so much for all of this. I do have a question. Did any of your data account for COVID? I know your years went into 2020, is that correct? Was there any data shift during COVID?
Yeah, so My original thought was that it would lead into the pandemic because I did do 2020, but a lot of the data didn't really show a huge shift from 2019 to 2020. So that was really surprising to me.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much again, Fozia, and thank you, Emily, for that question. Appreciate it. All right, and so our next student today is Summer Leba, and she interned with the Office of California State Governor Gavin Newsom's office.
Okay, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Summer.
So analysis of voter support for the California death penalty as it relates to life without parole. So the United States is one of the continue to implement the death penalty sentencing. California contains the highest inmate population in the nation with approximately 700 inmates currently on death row, and yet no one has actually been executed since 2006. Furthermore, Governor Newsom imposed an execution moratorium that will likely continue for the duration of his term. Previous research has already shown that the death penalty is given out arbitrarily and largely targets Black and Brown communities. In light of new information, I've for the changed over time, while also considering for the alternative sentencing that is life without parole. My hypothesis is that
Hey, Summer.
over time and life without parole may be voted.
Hey, Summer,
Yes.
so it looks like, so we're losing you now. So if you want to maybe turn off your video, and maybe that might help in terms of at least being able to hear the audio perfect.
Sure.
And
Okay.
you can start with your hypothesis. I think that's kind of where things started breaking up. That'd be great. Thank you.
Sounds good. My hypothesis is that voter support for the death penalty has declined. Parole may be voters' alternative. Using a large and comparative analysis, I looked at public opinion polls from Berkeley IGS over the course to compare voter support of death penalty versus life without parole. Additionally, I looked at Proposition 62 and 34 to compare and replacing it with life without parole. Shockingly, I found that while public opinion surveys demonstrate voter opposition to the death penalty, continued support to uphold the death penalty convictions, even when given the alternative that is life without parole. My policy suggestion is to propose a new sentencing, thus taking away death penalty without parole in order to reinforce careful consideration upon each case in its own unique sentencing based on characteristics of the crime. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Summer, for a great, fantastic presentation there. So, and if there is a question from the internship post site, if you want to go ahead, great. Katie Matthews, and let me just go ahead. I just unmuted you on our end.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Katie.
Fantastic. Summer, great job.
Yes.
Of course, this is really interesting presentation, really interesting research. So my question is the why. Do you think this is an issue about voter access and voter rights? Do you think this is an issue where, you know, death penalty sentencing is just not something that is important to a lot of voters? Why do you think this is happening?
So I actually have a lot of theories about this. So for one, largely the population, the casual voter is not going to know a lot about death penalty or even life without parole and what that entails. It's just like to the average voter. So that, but also I think the difference between the voter turnout on these public opinion surveys, it could just because the public opinion surveys are only out of 1,000 or so voters in California, whereas the ballots are reaching a much larger range of California is able to vote. Well, they're all able to vote, but so that could also be the difference, is that there's just some disparities in that who the public opinion versus the ballots actually being able to reach everybody in California.
Thank you. That helps. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you so much for a fantastic talk again today, Summer. And thank you, Katie, for the question. All right. And so our next student is going to be Eleanor Sanz, and she interned this term with the Office of California State Governor Gavin Newsom's office.
All right, can everyone see my presentation?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Okay, great. Good morning, my name is Eleanor Sanz. I am a political science student at UC Davis. 65% of California's Superior Court judges are white, while only 35% of California's population is white. Past research has revealed this gap in representation, as well as the difference in judgment that implicit racial bias can produce in our courts. My research looks at how well each county's Superior Court bench reflects its population and how county party affiliation plays a role in that representation. I hypothesize that counties with larger communities of people of color will have a larger share of judges of color on their Superior Court benches. I collected the racial demographic data for each of California's 58 counties, the demographic data for each of the state Superior Courts, and each county's party affiliations. I conducted a statistical analysis by comparing the share of the population that people of color make up to the share of each Superior Court bench made up by judges of color. Ultimately, this analysis revealed that there is a significant positive correlation between the percent of the population made up by people of color and the percent of Superior Court bench seats held by judges of color. The data also revealed the role that parties may play in the relationship between county demographics and Superior Court demographics, with a significant positive correlation between population and court makeup in Democratic counties. While data indicates that my hypothesis was correct, the Superior Court benches still fail to represent Californians overall. There is value in developing a judiciary that reflects the people in order to build trust between communities and their courts, and to incorporate necessary perspectives on the sinister role that race plays in our justice system. Thank you for your time.
Great, thank you, Eleanor, for a fantastic talk today. And so if there is a question from the internship host site. All right, and if not, we will turn it over to our academic team. All right, Sharif and Lonnie.
Hi, Eleanor. Excellent project. This is so interesting and very well done. I was wondering if you give us some more background on the judges, if they were elected or if they were appointed, and how that might make a difference.
Yeah, so overall, Superior Court judges are the trial judges that we see in each county, and typically they're elected by their county residents, but if there's a vacancy, the governor has the power to fill that seat, and that's actually what I was working on in my internship. So overall, like these judges are elected. So I don't know where, whether election or appointment has a bigger effect on the racial demographics, but I hope that answers your question.
It does. Great. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Eleanor, for a great presentation, and thank you, Sharif, for that question. And so our next student is Hannah Skepner, and she interned with the Office of California State Governor Gavin Newsom's office.
Okay, can everybody see my poster?
Yeah, looks great. Thank you, Hannah.
Okay, so hi, my name is Hannah Skepner, and I focus my research on discovering how the marijuana industry impacted California's economy during the pandemic, specifically the year 2020. Cannabis was first sold in retail shops for recreational use in California in January of 2018, and since then the industry really has thrived despite its competition with illegal settlers throughout the state. In that year alone, almost 70,000 jobs were created for Californians, and the industry brought in nearly $2.5 billion in sales. So if we move in time we move forward in time to the breakout of the COVID-19 pandemic, we can look to other states such as Colorado to see booms in their own industries, despite the trials and tribulations of the economic climate. So I wanted to look into California and to see if their industry experienced the same boom and how in turn that may have positively impacted the state economy. In order to examine this, I decided to operationalize my dependent variable of the economy in 3 ways. I looked at consumer sales, tax revenue, and job creation. And I observed these 3 facets over the years 2018, 2019, and 2020 in order to truly isolate the effect of my independent variable, which was the pandemic. You can find here on my poster bar charts of my variables. Looking at tax revenue, it was clear that there was a major jump in the amount the California government was earning in taxes from the industry between 2019 and 2020, and this jump equates to about a 62% increase. In terms of consumer sales, you can see another great jump between 2019 and 2020, and this jump equates to about an 86% increase in consumer sales despite this government shutdown. However, if we look at job creation, you can see that the pandemic did not really influence the cannabis industry's percentage of total jobs in California, and that these numbers have stayed relatively constant since the beginning of retail cannabis sales. Despite the lack of additional job creation from the industry, 2 out of the 3 facets that I examined of the economy improved in the year 2020 from the cannabis industry. And these findings suggest that the pandemic did influence economic improvement from this industry. It seems that having a recreational cannabis industry is beneficial to those employed by it and the greater population due to the money going back into the economy. This would suggest that moving forward with legalizing recreational marijuana both in other states and federally could potentially have just as big of a benefit. If the industry can thrive amid such trying times, imagine the growth it may continue to have. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Hannah, for a fantastic talk today. And so if you had a question from Hannah from her internship host site office, if you want to go ahead and raise your hand. All right, and if not, over to the academic team. All right, Professor Quila.
Hi, Hannah. Nice presentation. I was just wondering, where do you see kind of the cannabis industry kind of going from here? In terms of kind of as we're still kind of in the pandemic, as we're kind of maybe if we come out of it, if we get more, it's more endemic then at that point. I was just kind of curious as where you thought the industry was going.
Yeah, great question. So the interesting thing is that as I sort of was looking towards the future of my research, it seems that these numbers are starting to fall off actually as we're coming out of this lockdown phase. Some of the research that I found is showing that since a lot of people were stuck at home, their use was going up, and due to the fact that people were quarantining together, the amount that people were ordering per order was increasing. And now that we're back and stores are open again and there's more people in shops, that number is going back down. So it's possible that we can see these numbers start to trend downward despite the what seems to be growth coming from these numbers.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Once again, Hannah, for a fantastic talk, and thank you, Professor Quila, for the question. And so our next student today is Jose Mesquita Morales, and he interned with the Office of Sacramento City Council member Rick Jennings' office.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jose Manuel Mesquita Morales, and I studied the pandemic and its lasting effect on K-12 students in California. In 2019, we saw record numbers of households with high-speed internet access at home. But despite this record number, we saw a disparity occur with 26% of students saying that they did not have the same access of reliable internet access. And but that same year, we also saw the 5th year of improvement for standardized testing conducted, the CASP testing. And despite these exciting numbers and exciting things, COVID hit and everything was moved remote. And I wanted to know, how did school district funding at the start of the pandemic influence academic performance of K-12 students? And I believe that if a district's funding is low, then the academic performance was negatively affected. And I did a comparative analysis on 6 school districts, 2 school districts per regional type, such as urban, suburban, and rural. And the 2 districts within each regional type are divided up between well-funded and underfunded. And I chose Maricopa Unified, Corcoran Joint Unified, Natomas Unified, Rockland Unified, San Diego Unified, and Los Angeles Unified. And they were each studied between the school years of 2016 till 2021, except 2019 and 2020 when the standardized testing was not conducted. And Figure 2 shows the increasing funding coinciding with the increases in academic performance shown in Figure 1. And in Figure 3, we saw we see CASP test performance levels of the school district in 2020 to 2021. In my analysis, I saw within both the suburban and urban district types, the underfunded districts like Rockland Unified and Los Angeles Unified saw greater academic performance dips. And for rural school districts, we saw a general decline in performance regardless of funding. And my policy recommendations include greater investment in broadband infrastructure in rural communities, as well as establishing literacy tech literacy standards to ensure students can learn online. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jose, for a great presentation today. And so we have a question from Henry. So I just went ahead and unmute you on my end. So you should be able to unmute and you're perfect.
Hi, Jose. Just a question about the way you constructed the model here. So just in my experience, in addition to individual school districts differing in how well they're funded, it also makes a big difference, the socioeconomic status of the various students within the schools. And so sort of my question there is, did you only view individual school districts themselves as well-funded and not look at the data for the individual students within the schools? Or did you have some sort of variable accounting for the socioeconomic status of the individual students? And if so, did you find any differences there that might bring us to some other policy recommendations?
I actually did not look. I kept it at the district level within urban, suburban, and rural, and the general the population numbers of each school district. So I tried to keep them the two in each subtype were they had similar population numbers. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jose, and thank you, Henry, for the question. Appreciate it. And so our next student is Yimin Shin, and she interned this term with Office of Sacramento City Mayor Daryl Steinberg.
Oh, thank you. Can you guys see me and my screen?
Yep, looks great.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Jimin. I'm a current student here at UC Davis, and today I'll be evaluating, and today as Americans have over 500,000 in our homeless population, I'll be evaluating the impact of restrictions of anti-camping laws on the number of resources that a county can provide. Now, so for some quick background, one such example of these restrictions on anti-camping laws is actually a Ninth Court case called Martin v. Boise, which happened in 2019. It ruled that a city cannot actually enforce anti-camping laws unless they can offer alternative shelter. And this impacts the entire state of California and Washington, but not states like Texas. So as a result, I hypothesized that California counties, those that cannot enforce these kinds of laws, will actually increase the number of shelters significantly compared to, say, Texas counties. So in order to do this, I matched 2 California counties, San Diego and Sacramento, and I matched them with 2 Texas counties, Dallas and Travis County, respectively, based on the county population, their 2020 election results, and the rate of homelessness as of 2020. I then graphed the continuum of care data to measure the homeless population, as well as the number of shelters that county offered between 2014 to 2021. And as you can see in figure 3, at the red line, which is when Martin v. Boise actually starts impacting our data, we can see that in blue, the California counties actually do have a significant increase. In dark blue, San Diego actually quite so, while the Texas counties are a little more neutral or mixed results. In figure 4, you can once again see that the California counties in blue do actually increase as well, while these Texas counties seem to have a negative trend. Now, this does seem to suggest that there's a potential that restrictions like Martin v. Boise do encourage more shelters to be built within the county, but this could also just be due to an increase in demand from an increase in homelessness in recent years. So for future research, I would definitely suggest looking more on the aggregate level, seeing if this trend holds up in later years, as well as currently, as of right now, I would suggest to California policymakers that we should be building more shelters as we're still underutilizing or underfunding everything. Thank you everyone for coming to my presentation.
Great, thank you so much, Shimon, for a fantastic talk today. And if there is someone from the internship host site that would go ahead and like to ask a question, go ahead and raise your hand. All right, and if not, over to our academic team. All right, Professor Butters.
Hey, Jay, man, that's a great presentation there. I didn't realize that you were in Mayor Steinberg's office. We talked about at one point this quarter that Gimme Shelter podcast he went and did like a month ago. So this is great that you're working on this. It's impressive work and I like it very much. So the one question I had here is, so it kind of looks like Sacramento and San Diego are kind of parallel, just like the two Texas counties are parallel in your figure 4, but in figure 3, San Diego kind of like takes off and after this Martin v. Boise data in figure 3 here. So I was wondering what about San Diego is different than even Sacramento? Is it that there's why they're building more permanent shelters rather than temporary ones, or in addition to temporary ones? Is it because there's more demand? Is there more space available? Is there more money? For what is the difference between San Diego and Sacramento? Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Butters. Unfortunately, I didn't look too closely at the difference in San Diego and Sacramento, but if I were to take a stab at why they have a difference, I believe that in the total shelter, it is definitely that San Diego probably prioritizes more permanent shelters rather than just temporary shelters. Permanent shelters being like rehousing and other permanent shelters that emphasize less immediate housing and more long-term 6 months to 2 years solutions.
Excellent, thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Eamon, for a fantastic talk, and thank you, Professor Butters, for the question. And so our next student that will be presenting today is Karen Hinosa, and she interned with the Mexican consulate.
Can everyone see me?
Yes, looks great. Thank you, Karen.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Karen, and today I'm going to be discussing the increase in maternal mortality rates. In California, through the years of 2008 through 2016, the California Pregnancy Surveillance System stated that 1,934 deaths were recorded due to pregnancy or within a year later. My research question is, what effect does healthcare access have on mothers' mortality rates in regions throughout California? I hypothesized that with an increase in healthcare access, specifically the amount of physicians and specialists in that area, will lead to a decrease in maternal mortality rates. My research design consisted of looking at the number of primary care providers, as well as looking at how many specialists were in each county, and then finding the average number for the 6 different regions I have chosen. Then I looked into the regions and looked at the rates for maternal mortalities. I compared the data with the rates of maternal mortalities in that region and the number of physicians and specialists. My findings have resulted in more populated areas having more healthcare providers, resulting in fewer maternal mortality rates in comparison to more rural areas that lack the healthcare accessibility. Overall, my hypothesis was proven correct. However, I know that there's other factors that are plausible as to why these rates are increasing. To future policy suggestions, I would suggest that right now, as of today, there's very limited research, so there needs to be more investment and more money put into that. And also, there needs to be more facilities in order for there to be more specialists and healthcare providers for those areas that have a higher mortality rate. Thank you, everyone.
Great, thank you so much, Karen, for a fantastic talk today. And so I'll go over to our attendees. If there is anyone from the internship host site that has a question, if you want to go ahead and raise your hand. And if not, I'll go ahead and go over to the academic team. All right, Sharif Amlani.
Hi, Karen. Excellent presentation. I thought you did a really great job, and the poster was really well done. I was wondering what type of healthcare access specifically was instrumental in reducing maternal mortality rates?
Thank you for the question. I was, when I said that policy suggestion, there's a lot of already acts going into it and saying that there needs to be an increase for data and research, but there needs to be training for discrimination. But I hadn't seen anything particularly in terms of how, like the impact of how many specifically how many physicians and specialists are in areas. And what I was looking at is that it decreases the maternal mortality rates, and those areas that are more isolated have more trouble getting access to that. So that's kind of where I was headed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Karen, again for a fantastic talk today. And thank you, Cherie, for that question. Appreciate it. And so our next student to present today is Sophia Scanlon, who interned with the Mexican Consulate.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Thank you, Sophia.
Okay, great. Good morning. My name is Sophia Scanlon. I'm a sophomore attending the University of California, Davis, studying political science and psychology. The California dream of homeownership is next to impossible due to the lack of housing and increasing housing costs throughout the state. The question to ask is, what is the effect of the housing shortage on home value for home buyers in the cities of Fresno, Los Angeles, Sacramento, San Diego, San Francisco, and San Jose? To determine this, I conducted a comparative case study using observational data of the total number of regional housing needs allocation, or RHNA permits, on the average home value in the 35th to 65th percentile from the 6 urban cities over a 5-year span from 2016 to 2020. I hypothesized that the fewer homes built, the higher the housing cost. I measured the RHNA permits and the average home value by collecting the data from various city planning websites and the Zillow Home Value Index, respectively. In Figure 1, the distribution of housing permits varied over time in each city, but increased in some. Not surprisingly, in Figure 2, as time went on, the average home value increased. And in Figure 3, my hypothesis was not supported because overall in each city, as more RHNA permits were issued, the average home value increased, as seen in the positive slope with a weak correlation of 0.37. From my research, I found that RHNA is meeting LAO's recommendation in issuing enough housing permits to curb the housing crisis in California. However, the cost of housing continues to increase despite the increase in housing permits. Therefore, researchers could conduct a longitudinal study longer than mine in the future to assess how permits influence housing cost, as well as how various housing agencies continuing to examine how these numbers may change due to the new housing legislation passed. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Sophia, for a fantastic talk today. And if anyone from the Mexican Consulate want to go ahead and ask the question, if you want to go ahead and raise your hand. And if not, then we'll go ahead and turn it over to the academic team. All right, Professor Quila.
Hi, Sophia. Nice presentation. I was wondering, you're seeing this positive relationship between permits and home value. I guess, why do you think that might be occurring? What is your thoughts as to why that's kind of the relationship that we're seeing here?
Yeah, thank you. So unfortunately, my data is it's too early in order to tell whether or not homes will decrease, as I hypothesized, because these permits were just issued and there isn't enough time to see after the construction of these homes were built if housing costs will decrease in these urban cities. And so that's why I believe that there's a positive correlation, just because there isn't enough time to see if the home value will decrease since they were just issued.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you so much again, Sophia, for a fantastic presentation. And thank you, Professor Quila, for that question. And so our next student that will be presenting today is Natalie Bost, and she interned with the California Business Roundtable.
Hello, can you see my screen?
Yeah, looks great. Thank you, Natalie.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Natalie, and I'll be talking about California's high cost of living and trailing employment growth. To set the scene, California energy prices are 56% higher than other states, and low-wage industries are struggling to reach pre-pandemic employment levels. So what impact does inflation have on this slow recovery of low-wage jobs? I theorize that counties with higher living costs will have slower growth in low-wage sectors of employment. Working families are more burdened by rising prices because they spend a larger portion of their overall income on essential goods. And California's higher prices are draining the pool of potential workers by for low-wage industries by driving their migration out of the state and by increasing quit rates of service sector jobs, as these industries are endlessly adjusting to the pandemic life. I analyzed 2021 employment growth across 12 industries for 36 counties. I used average gas prices, household electricity spending, and fair market rent to estimate the cost of living in each county. There is a relationship between higher costs and slower growth in 10 of these counties, but this correlation coefficient of 0.27 reveals that this relationship is very weak. While the cost of living is higher in these Bay Area counties, like you can see here in Marin and state across the state. Compared to national averages, the employment recovery is falling behind and our energy cost imbalance is continuing to grow. Even though my results show a weak correlation, the most vulnerable populations will fall behind as the state transitions away from pandemic policy and prices continue to rise. So I propose the state work to mitigate additional costs to low-income workers, to pursue affordable energy production, and to identify how industries have changed, thereby identifying and gaining insight into the specific barriers to employment recovery in California. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Natalie, for a fantastic presentation today. And then if there's a question from the internships host site office of California Business Roundtable. All right, and if not, a question from the academic team. All right, Professor Butters.
Hey, Natalie, excellent. I love these figures. It reminds me of when I worked for the labor market informatics folks over in Ohio. So this is excellent. These are really well done. I like them very much. I'm drawn to the map. Obviously, I love maps, but I want to ask you about your third figure in there. That's basically your results, right? So it's the relationship between the average cost and the lower wage of employment. And I see that you've got your negative correlation there. But the two that are standing out to me, two of the points there, Santa Cruz and Marin, look like they're probably driving that correlation, and they're kind of outliers. So, and I would say probably there's at least probably a weak positive correlation for everybody else without those two. So what do you think's going on in Marin and Santa Cruz, where it's driving down? They're extremely expensive, and their employment growth is going down. So is that where we're losing a lot of low wage workers, or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so there's two factors here, right? We have our living costs, which I estimated using three factors. Interestingly, and obviously, electricity prices were actually lower in these Bay Area counties, like coastal counties, are less like temperate and don't, it's 70 degrees there all year long. So no one's running their ACs or heaters, and often homes aren't built with those anyways. Whereas in Central Valley counties like Fresno, electricity spending was much higher than some of these more expensive areas. So what's driving these higher costs is definitely housing. Rent is astronomical there compared to the rest of the state, as well as gasoline. And then as far as employment growth, because these areas have such higher living costs, rent is like hardly affordable there for most working families. There's been a lot more migration and shift in employment. So people leaving counties like Santa Cruz, moving more inland, and also quitting those, having to leave their jobs because of the pandemic. If working families are facing like difficulties finding childcare and things like that, they're not able to leave their children to go into work when you're working in the service sector, right? Where you have to go into work. There's not like a telecommute option for that. So that's driving, I think, migration out of those counties, and then also contributing to the declining low wage employment.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Natalie, for a fantastic talk. And thank you so much, Professor Butters, for that question. And so our last presentation for the session is by Aiden Cato, and he interned this term with Sacramento Metro Chamber of Commerce. Aiden?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Looks great, and we can hear you.
Awesome. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Aiden Cotto, and I'm an undergraduate student at UC Davis, majoring in international relations. Homelessness is one of the biggest issues in California, with billions of dollars being spent annually to attempt to resolve it. One of the primary uses of this money comes in the form of of building new housing, and in California, this means normally permanent shelters. But we're unsure, which leads me to my research question, if permanent housing options are more effective at housing the homeless population than temporary options and temporary housing. And my hypothesis is that my hypothesis is that permanent solutions will be more effective at solving homelessness, and an increase in the construction of permanent facilities would decrease homelessness. And to measure this, I examined housing and urban development continuum of care counts from 2015, 2017, and 2019. These reports count the number of available permanent and temporary shelter beds. I also separated counties into counties that focused more on building permanent shelters and counties that focused on a more balanced approach, building both permanent and temporary shelters, to kind of measure the difference between the homeless populations in these two types of counties. And what I found actually really surprised me. And so by comparing the number of comparing the number of available beds annually with the levels of homeless populations from point in time counts over the same time period, what I discovered is that levels of sheltered homeless populations were somewhat connected to the levels of temporary available beds, not permanent available beds, meaning that when there was a decrease in the availability or a status quo, when the number of temporary beds didn't really change, the homeless population that was housed declined. However, when there was an slight increase in temporary bed availability, the housed homeless population declined much less drastically, even though it still declined. And I attribute this to an increase in those same counties, to an increase in permanent beds. So the findings that I found, or the findings that I had, is that I found that homeless individuals were more likely to be sheltered when more temporary bed options were available to them, while in counties that didn't focus on those temporary shelters, there was a decrease in the unhoused population and a sharp increase in the unhoused population.
Thank you so much, Aiden, for a fantastic presentation today. And if there's a question from the Sacramento Metro Chamber of Commerce, I'm going to go ahead and raise your hand. And then if not, over to the academic team. All right, Professor Butters.
Excellent. Thank you, Aiden. I think it's a great presentation. First of all, you and Jamin should talk, I think, because you're both working on homelessness, pretty similar stuff, I think. And so you did an overall analysis of California, and you talked about the different counties that we're focusing on sheltered or I'm not sorry, not sheltered, temporary permanent housing. Do you think this would look different if you looked under the overall California numbers and started looking like, is this an inland versus coastal issue? Like, what do you think would change if you dug a little deeper into underneath California?
So I kind of did that when I was looking at all of the data. I was kind of like just mentally comparing things. And so what I noticed in general is that overall these trends seem to stick wherever you go in California. And so when, states or when counties are building more permanent shelters and decreasing as they convert or stagnating the levels of temporary housing throughout the state, it's roughly the same. You see these similar results in terms of the number of beds filled each night and the number of homeless individuals on the streets.
Oh, that's interesting. That's great. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you, Eden, for a fantastic talk today. And thank you, Professor Butters, for that question. And so with that, I'm going to give Brooke just a minute here to go ahead and stop our recording.